The evening air was cold, carrying with it a quiet stillness that wrapped around the streets of the city like an invisible blanket. People hurried past each other, lost in their own worlds, their footsteps echoing against the pavement. No one noticed the small girl standing near the corner of the streetlight, except fate. Her name was Aisha. Aisha was no more than 8 years old. Her clothes were worn, her shoes slightly torn at the edges, and her small hands carried the roughness of a life far too hard for someone her age. Yet despite everything, her eyes held something rare: honesty, and a kind of quiet strength. Not far from her, stepping out of a sleek black car, was Daniel Harrington. Daniel Harrington was a billionaire. A man known across the country for his wealth, his power, and his sharp decisions. His tailored suit fit him perfectly, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. To the world he was untouchable. But tonight, even a man like him didn't realize he had just made a mistake. As he walked past Aisha, adjusting his coat and speaking briefly on his phone, something slipped from his hand unnoticed. A small, elegant leather bag. It fell silently onto the pavement. Daniel continued walking, unaware. Aisha's eyes caught the movement. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly stepped forward. Her small fingers picked up the bag. It felt heavier than she expected. She looked around. The man was already a few steps ahead, walking fast, disappearing into the crowd. For a brief moment, Aisha stood still, her heart beat faster. She could have kept walking, she could have taken it. After all, life had never been kind to her, but something inside her refused. She tightened her grip on the bag and began running. "Sir!" Her small voice echoed weakly in the noise of the street. Daniel didn't hear. She ran faster, her breath growing heavier, her feet stumbling slightly. But she didn't stop. "Sir!" She tried again, louder this time. Daniel paused. He turned slightly, confused, and then he saw her, a small girl, running toward him, holding something in her hands. She finally reached him, slightly out of breath, her chest rising and falling quickly. She extended the bag toward him with trembling hands. This is your bag." "It fell," she said softly. Daniel froze. For a moment he just stared at her. Then his eyes moved to the bag. A sudden shock ran through him. He grabbed it quickly and opened it. Inside was a diamond, not just any diamond, a rare, flawless stone worth nearly $200 million. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His eyes widened in disbelief. This was impossible. He looked back at the girl. You brought this back?" he asked, his voice unusually unsteady. Aisha nodded gently. "Yes, sir, it's yours." There was no hesitation in her voice, no greed, no expectation, just truth. Daniel stared at her as if seeing something he had never seen before in his entire life. Do you know what's inside this bag?" he asked slowly. Aisha shook her head. "No, sir, it's not mine." Those simple words hit him harder than anything. For years, Daniel had dealt with people who would do anything for money. Betrayal, lies, manipulation, it was all he knew. But this child, this little girl who clearly had nothing, she chose honesty. His grip on the bag loosened slightly as he looked at her again, this time noticing everything: the worn clothes, the tired eyes, the quiet dignity. "What's your name?" he asked. "Aisha." "Where are your parents, Aisha?" She looked down. "My mother is sick, and my father," her voice trailed off, "he's not with us anymore." Something inside Daniel shifted, a feeling he hadn't felt in years: guilt, pain, humanity. "And you still returned this?" he whispered, almost to himself. Aisha simply nodded again. There was silence between them now, but it wasn't empty, it was heavy with meaning. Daniel slowly closed the bag. Then, something unexpected happened. He looked at Aisha and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He bent down slightly so his eyes were level with hers. "Aisha, this diamond, it saved me today. If I had lost it—" He paused, exhaling deeply. "Everything would have been different." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. He smiled faintly. "But you saved it." Another pause, then he placed the bag back into her hands. Aisha blinked, confused. "Sir, this is yours." Daniel shook his head. "No, not anymore." Her hands trembled slightly. I can't take this." "Yes, you can," he said gently, "because you deserve it more than anyone I've ever met." Tears slowly formed in her eyes. "I don't want money. I just wanted to return what was yours," she said, her voice breaking. Daniel's expression softened. "And that's exactly why you should have it." The street around them continued moving, people passing by, unaware that something extraordinary was unfolding in that quiet moment. Aisha looked at the bag again, then back at him. Her heart was racing. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she felt its weight, not just in her hands but in her life, and for the first time, hope began to bloom inside her. Years passed. The cold streets where Aisha once stood were now only a memory. The small girl had grown, but her heart remained the same. The diamond had changed everything, not in the way people might expect. Aisha didn't spend it on luxury, she didn't chase comfort. Instead, she remembered every night she had gone to sleep hungry, every moment she had watched her mother suffer without proper treatment, every helpless face she had seen on the streets, and so, she made a choice that would echo far beyond her own life. On a quiet morning, under a clear sky, a building stood tall where once there had been nothing. A hospital, simple, yet filled with purpose, a place where the poor could come without fear, a place where no one would be turned away. As the doors opened for the first time, people began to gather, confused, hopeful, uncertain, and standing at the entrance was Aisha, no longer the little girl in torn shoes, but a young woman with the same honest eyes. A small plaque near the entrance read, "For those who had nothing and still chose kindness." Inside those walls, lives began to change. Patients received treatment, families found hope, tears turned into smiles, and somewhere in the quiet corners of that hospital, the spirit of a small girl who once chose honesty over everything lived on. And Daniel Harrington watched it all from a distance, his heart filled with something he had never truly known before. Peace. Daniel Harrington stood across the street, his hands resting quietly inside the pockets of his coat. The hospital doors opened and closed as people walked in, some weak, some hopeful, some carrying loved ones, and others carrying silent prayers. He didn't step forward, he just watched. The sound of distant traffic faded in his ears as his focus remained on one person, Aisha. She moved gently from one patient to another, speaking softly, her presence alone bringing comfort. She wasn't dressed like someone wealthy, no expensive jewelry, no display of status, just a simple outfit and that same calm strength in her eyes. Daniel exhaled slowly. Years ago, he handed over a diamond worth $200 million. But standing there now, watching what it had become, he realized something. That diamond had not been lost, it had been transformed. Inside the hospital, a frail old man sat on a bench, coughing lightly into his hands. His son stood beside him, worry written all over his face. "We don't have money," the son whispered to the receptionist, his voice trembling. "Please, can you still help him?" The receptionist gave a gentle smile. "No one is turned away here." The man's eyes filled with tears. Nearby, Aisha noticed them. She walked over slowly. "What's his condition?" she asked softly. The son looked at her, unsure of who she was. "Lung infection, it's getting worse," he said. "We tried everywhere. They all ask for money we don't have." Aisha nodded, her expression steady but her eyes softening. "Don't worry," she said quietly. "He'll be treated." The old man looked up at her with weak eyes. "Beta," he whispered, "why are you helping us?" Aisha paused for a moment. Her gaze drifted slightly, as if remembering something far away. Then she smiled. "Because once, someone helped me." Her voice carried a quiet truth that needed no further explanation. The man closed his eyes, tears slipping down the sides of his face. Outside, Daniel's throat tightened. He turned his face slightly, blinking slowly as emotion built up inside him. He wasn't a man who cried. He had trained himself not to, but this was different. For years he had built empires, closed deals, and measured success in numbers. But none of that had ever felt like this. None of it had ever felt meaningful. Inside the hospital, a young mother sat beside a bed, holding the tiny hand of her child. The child's breathing was uneven, fragile. A doctor approached gently. "We've started treatment," he said. "It's going to take time, but there's hope." The mother broke down in tears. "Thank you. Thank you," she repeated over and over again. Aisha stood a few steps away watching, her hands slowly clasped together, her eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. She had seen too much pain in life, but she had also learned something powerful. Pain could be transformed. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the hospital building, Aisha finally stepped outside. The air was calm, quiet. She took a deep breath, and that's when she saw him, Daniel, standing there, just as he had been hours ago. Their eyes met for a moment. Neither of them spoke. Then Aisha slowly walked toward him. "You've been here all day," she said softly. Daniel gave a small smile. "I didn't want to interrupt." Aisha looked at him carefully. "You didn't come inside." I didn't know if I should, he replied honestly. Aisha's expression softened. You're always welcome. There was a pause, a gentle silence. Then Daniel looked at the hospital behind her. You built all of this, he said quietly. Aisha shook her head. No, she replied. It wasn't just me. Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. She looked down for a moment, then back at him. It started with you. Daniel let out a slow breath. I just gave you a diamond. Aisha smiled faintly. No, you gave me a chance. Those words stayed in the air between them, heavy, real. Daniel looked away for a moment, his eyes reflecting something deeper. I've spent my whole life thinking money was the answer, he said. That it could fix anything. Aisha listened quietly, but I was wrong, he continued. Money doesn't fix people. People fix people. Aisha nodded gently. Yes, she said, but sometimes people need a little help first. Daniel looked back at her. And you became that help. A small breeze passed between them, carrying a quiet stillness. In the distance, the sound of an ambulance siren echoed faintly. Aisha turned her head instinctively, her focus shifting immediately. I have to go, she said softly. Daniel nodded. Of course. She took a step back, then paused. Will you come inside tomorrow? She asked. Daniel hesitated for just a second, then he gave a small nod. Yes, Aisha smiled. Not a big smile, just a real one. And then she turned, walking back toward the hospital doors, disappearing inside once again. Daniel remained where he was, but something inside him had already moved forward. The next morning arrived quietly. The hospital was already busy. Doctors moving quickly, nurses speaking gently, patients waiting with hope in their eyes. And for the first time, Daniel Harrington stepped inside. The moment he crossed the entrance, something shifted in him. The air felt different. Not like the offices he was used to. Not like boardrooms filled with tension and ambition. This place carried something else, humanity. As he walked through the hallway, he noticed the small details. The way a nurse adjusted a patient's blanket with care. The way a doctor knelt down to speak at eye level with a child. The way people who had nothing still managed to smile. Then he saw her again. Aisha. She was speaking to a group of staff members, giving quiet instructions. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority. Not the kind that comes from power, the kind that comes from purpose. Daniel stood there for a moment, watching, and slowly something began to form in his mind. Not a business idea, not a deal, something else. Something he had never truly considered before. A way to be part of this, not as a donor, not as a billionaire, but as a human being. He took a step forward, then another, and just as he was about to call out her name, a loud commotion suddenly broke the calm inside the hospital. Voices raised, footsteps rushed. A stretcher was being pushed quickly through the entrance. A young boy lay on it, unconscious, his face pale. Move! Please move! Someone shouted. Aisha turned instantly, her expression changing. What happened? She asked, urgently. He was hit by a car, a man cried out. We don't have money. Please save him. For a split second, time seemed to slow, and Daniel stood frozen, watching it all unfold, because in that moment, he wasn't just a spectator anymore. Something inside him was about to be tested. The stretcher wheels screeched softly against the polished floor as it rushed past Daniel, cutting through the calm like a sudden storm. The boy's small body lay motionless, his chest rising faintly, as if even breathing had become a struggle. Aisha didn't hesitate. Take him to emergency, now, she said firmly, already moving alongside the stretcher. The staff reacted instantly. There was no confusion, no delay. This was what they were built for. The man who had brought the boy in stumbled forward, his hands shaking, his voice breaking. Please, please save him, he's all I have. Aisha placed a hand gently on his shoulder, grounding him for a moment. We will do everything we can, she said softly, her voice steady despite the urgency. The doors to the emergency room swung open, and within seconds the boy disappeared inside, and just like that, silence fell again in the hallway. But it wasn't the same silence. It was heavier now, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every second feel longer than it should. Daniel stood still, his eyes fixed on those closed doors, for the first time in years. He felt helpless. He had money, more than enough. But standing here in this moment, none of it could guarantee that boy's life. And that realization unsettled him deeply. A few feet away, the boy's father sank onto a bench, his hands covering his face as quiet sobs escaped through his fingers. Daniel hesitated. Then slowly, he walked toward him. He wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't used to moments like this, raw, unfiltered pain with no business solution, no transaction to fix it. But still, he sat down beside him. For a moment he said nothing. Then quietly he spoke. He's in the right place. The man looked up, his eyes red, filled with fear. You don't understand, he whispered. I couldn't even take him to a proper hospital. I have nothing. Daniel swallowed. I understand more than you think, he replied softly. It wasn't entirely true, but something inside him wanted it to be. The man shook his head weakly. If something happens to him, his voice cracked, I won't survive it. Daniel's chest tightened. He looked toward the emergency room doors again, and for the first time in a long time, he made a silent promise. Not to himself, but to someone else. Inside the emergency room, everything moved fast. Machines beeped steadily, doctors worked with focused precision, and nurses moved in perfect coordination. Aisha stood near the boy's side, her eyes locked on him. Pulse is weak, one doctor said. Blood pressure dropping, another added. Aisha's hands clenched slightly. Stay with us, she whispered under her breath, as if the boy could hear her, because sometimes, even when logic says otherwise, hope still speaks. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Outside, Daniel remained seated beside the father. Neither of them spoke anymore. Words had run out. All that remained was waiting, and waiting can be the hardest thing of all. After what felt like an eternity, the emergency room doors finally opened. A doctor stepped out, removing his gloves, his expression serious but not defeated. Both men stood up immediately. How is he? The father asked, his voice trembling. The doctor took a breath. He's critical, but stable for now, he said. The father's knees almost gave out as relief and fear collided inside him. We've managed to stop the internal bleeding, the doctor continued, but the next few hours are very important. Tears streamed down the man's face. Can I see him? Just for a moment, the doctor nodded. As the man rushed inside, Daniel remained where he was. His shoulders dropped slightly as he exhaled. Not safe, but not lost. And sometimes, that's enough to hold on to. Aisha stepped out shortly after. Her face showed signs of exhaustion, but her eyes were still strong. She noticed Daniel standing there. You stayed, she said quietly. Daniel gave a small nod. I couldn't leave. There was a brief pause between them. Then Aisha spoke again. This is what it's like, she said softly, every day. Daniel looked at her. I didn't know, he admitted. Aisha's gaze softened. Most people don't. Another silence followed, but this one wasn't heavy. It was understanding. Daniel glanced toward the emergency room. Will he make it? He asked. Aisha didn't answer immediately. She looked down for a moment, then back up. I don't know, she said honestly, but we'll fight for him. Daniel nodded slowly, and then something inside him clicked, not suddenly, not dramatically, but deeply. He looked around the hospital, the busy staff, the worried families, the quiet acts of kindness happening in every corner, and he realized this place needed more. Not just effort, not just heart, but support. Real, lasting support. He turned back to Aisha. What do you need? He asked. Aisha looked at him slightly confused. For the hospital, Daniel clarified. What do you need that you don't have? She hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because she had never asked. We manage, she said. Daniel gave a faint, almost knowing smile. That's not what I asked. Aisha looked at him carefully. There was no pride in his voice, no arrogance, just sincerity. She took a slow breath. More beds, she said quietly. Better equipment, more doctors. Sometimes we have to turn people away when it's too much. Her voice softened at the last part. That's the hardest thing. Daniel nodded. He understood, not just the words, but the weight behind them. Then we fix that, he said simply. Aisha blinked. What? Daniel looked directly at her. No more turning people away. There was something different in his tone now, not the voice of a businessman, not the voice of a billionaire. The voice of someone who had finally found something worth investing in. Aisha searched his face, trying to understand. This isn't a small thing, Daniel, she said. It's not just money, it's responsibility, it's lives. I know, he replied. And for the first time, he truly did. A long silence followed. But this time, it wasn't uncertainty. It was the beginning of something much bigger. From inside the emergency room, the faint sound of the heart monitor echoed again, steady, fragile, but still fighting, and both of them turned their attention toward it, because in that moment, everything else could wait. Hours passed, but the hospital never slept. The boy's condition stabilized slowly, the monitors beeping a steady rhythm that brought cautious relief to the father and staff alike. Outside, the first light of dawn crept across the city, painting the streets in soft gold. Inside, Aisha stood at a window looking out, not at the world, but the possibility of what the world could be when compassion led the way. Daniel stepped beside her, silent for a moment, taking in the sight of a hospital that had grown beyond brick and stone. It was a symbol of hope, of choices made with integrity. and of the extraordinary power of one honest, selfless act. You know, Daniel said quietly, this all started because you did the right thing. A small girl returned a bag that wasn't hers, and look at what it became. Aisha's eyes softened, reflecting both pride and humility. It wasn't just me, it was the people we help. Every life we touch makes us bigger than any of us. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding fully for the first time that wealth alone is meaningless without purpose. Then we keep going, we don't stop here. More hospitals, more care, more people who need someone to believe in them. Aisha smiled faintly but fiercely. Yes, and maybe one day no child will have to stand on the streets and watch the world pass by, hoping someone will notice them. Daniel looked at her, seeing not just a little girl who had returned his bag, but the woman who had changed a city, and perhaps even a generation. Aisha, let's make sure your story doesn't end here. Let's make sure others have the chance you gave yourself the courage to take. Aisha turned her gaze back to the streets below, where children ran barefoot, women carried burdens, and men worked tirelessly, often unseen. They need to know that kindness isn't weakness, that honesty isn't rare, that hope can start with just one person. Daniel's hand rested briefly on her shoulder. Then we start now, together. And in that moment, as the first rays of sunlight bathed the hospital in gold, it wasn't a diamond worth 200 million that mattered. It was the life-changing choice of one small girl who had chosen honesty, the courage of one woman who had chosen compassion, and the willingness of one man to believe that a better world was possible. Aisha turned to Daniel, her voice firm, carrying the weight of the message for everyone listening. If you see someone in need, help them. If you can make a difference, do it. And never forget, one act of honesty, one act of kindness can change the world. Daniel nodded, echoing her truth. Let's all be the reason someone believes in humanity again. And as the city awoke, hospital doors opened wider than ever before, welcoming every soul in need, not just as patients but as a reminder that every life matters, every choice counts, and every act of courage can ignite hope where it's needed most. The story of Aisha and Daniel became more than a story of wealth or loss. It became a call to action for everyone watching, reminding us that real change begins not with power, but with heart. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person to return what isn't theirs, to see the world not for what it is but for what it could be, and maybe, just maybe, you can be that person too. The choice is yours.